So now we'll be understanding what is a web service, why do we need it, and what is an API? API in relation with SOAP and REST API, right? So web services are the services that are spread over the web, like over the internet or over the intranet, right? So web services basically enables the communication between applications over the web and provides a standard protocol or format for communication. Right. So using web services, two applications designed in different languages can talk to each other and can share information or exchange the data as well. So web services are platform independent, and almost every big application or a big project, they generally use these web services, right? These days, many, if you talk about e-commerce applications, if you talk about travel domain, hotel industry, wherever you navigate to their websites, the communication, the data exchange are done with the help of web services itself, right? So there's a very popular example of a like a flight reservation system, as in, let's say if I go to an application called as makemytrip.com, and let's say if I search for some flights over here, let's say from New Delhi to Rome for any dates, and if I click on search, so in couple of seconds you're gonna see the results from different websites, their pricing, their time, right? See, all these different websites are there. So how Make My Trip they know about that? Let's say Emirates. It's on 12th of August. The Emirate flight is available from Delhi at 11 a.m. and like this is the flight duration, and this is the cost that they are going to charge if we book a ticket from Emirates. And if we book a ticket from a different flight, then there will be different pricing and the different times zones the flights are available, right? So how come Make My Trip knows about all these things? Or in other words, we can say how Make My Trip is actually getting these information. So there could be following possibilities. The first one, either MakeMyTrip.com has the database access of all these airlines, right? Which doesn't seem to be feasible, right? Or it may happen that all airlines, they dump their data onto Make My Trip server in some regular intervals. Like let's say after every half an hour, they dump their updated data, right? Which is again not very feasible, because it may happen that there could be n number of customers who are searching for the same flight and try to book a ticket, and a data is dumped, let's say 10 minutes back, right? So there's still 20 minutes to dump another data for Emirates or for a different airline, right? So if the data dump is happening, it's not real time. It's happening after a particular interval of time. So there might be a chance that two-person might book the same flight ticket, right? Or maybe there are only one seat available, and more than two passengers are booking the same ticket, and they're able to book the same flight, right? So these are the challenges, right, that can be faced if the airlines they directly dump the data into the Make My Trip server, right? So this option is not feasible. So the third thing could be Make My Trip is using the web services provided by each airline, and by accessing those web services, Make My Trip is actually getting the real time data. So this seems to be more feasible. So with the help of web services only, Make My Trip is actually getting the real-time data. And there could be a possibility that Make My Trip website is designed using Ruby, Kuwait Airs, their website might be designed using PHP. Emirate might be designed, their backend is designed using Java, right? So web services are language independent. They have nothing to do with the language of the website because the communication will be done with the help of some XML or JSON files. So that's the reason using web services to different applications designed in different languages can communicate with each other, can share the information, can exchange the data. Right. So web services are basically platform independent. So it's not only that different websites or projects they use web services to perform communication. Even web services can be used in same project as well, where the UI is designed in a different language. Let's say if we talk about Facebook, right? The UI could be designed in Angular. The middle layer, the business layer could be coded in a different language. Let's say it's coded in Java. And the data layer could be using a different technology. Let's say Oracle or Big Data, Hadoop, something like that. So how the communication will be done in these three different technologies? So this will be done with the help of a web service. Let's say a user goes to the UI, which is designed in Angular. He enters a username and password. Now UI will actually gonna send the request with the help of some web services, and the request will go to the database layer. It will actually read that request and will process and send it back with the help of web services to the UI, and then the user is able to log in, right? So in the same project as well, web services are being used. And these days 90% of the applications are designed using web services. Now let's say if a user is entering a username and a password, if he enters incorrect username or password, will the application allow him to enter into that website or into the application? And if the application is not allowing while user has provided incorrect information, if the application is not allowing the user to enter into the application, then how application comes to know that whether it is a valid user or not? Because that information is stored in a database, right? So how application is communicating with the database? Application is sending the request to the database, and that request is sent with the help of a web service. Now it doesn't matter the web service is designed in a form of an XML or a JSON, or is it a REST based, or is it a SOAP based? That is a different thing. We're going to talk about those protocols as well, right? But the communication between these two technologies are done with the help of a web service. And even if a user is a valid user, and if the request has been approved by the database server and send it back to the UI with the help of the REST, with the help of web service itself, the request will be sent in a form of some response code, right? There are a number of response codes available which we need to validate when we are performing web services testing. So the response code are in a series of 200, 300, 400, right? A number of response codes are there, and their definitions available, right? We're going to talk about those things as well. Now, if I take a layman example over here, let's say a two friend talks with each other using a common language, could be English, right? So here the mode of communication would be the medium and the format that is used. So here the medium will be the mobile phone through which they are actually communicating, and the language that they are using will be the format. Right. Same way, when the two application they communicate using the web services, so they use some medium and some format while performing the communication. So between the two different technologies communicating with each other, the medium will be HTTP, right? The internet, and the format could be JSON, it could be XML, right? Let's say the UI we talked about is designed in Angular. The database is big data, right? So the information that is sent over the HTTP will be in a format of a JSON, right? And the database is also that much capable that it can understand the JSON format. Even the Angular application is capable of understanding the JSON format, right? So basically, it's like a client server architecture where if I talk about client server, then let's say there is a client and there's a server, and client sends the request to the server, and server it processes the request and send back the response back to the client. Now client, basically if I talk about client over here, so client could be just a moment, so I'll make it, and this is server, right? Just a moment. Yeah. So the client it sends the request to the server, and the server sent back the response to the client. So this is something that happens with the web services response. And here the client is the service consumer and the server is the service provider. So client is like your UI. It sends the request to the server, and server it processes the request and send back the response to the client after doing all the calculation. Like in the case of Make My Trip example, Make My Trip is a consumer, right? And service provider is all airlines, right? So this is the overall crux behind the web services. So client sends the request, make my service, it sends the request, and the response is received from the server, from the service provider basically, and service providers are all the airlines, right? So they provide the response back to the client. So now if we discussed about how web services are implemented, so there are two ways. One is SOAP and the other one is REST. And we'll be talking about these protocols in our next video. All right. Thank you.